There is a country most people think they know, and then there is the country that actually exists. The version most people carry in their heads was built from decades of headlines, nuclear negotiations, revolutionary clerics, burning flags at televised protests. And while none of that is invented, it represents perhaps the thinnest possible slice of a civilization that has been running continuously, in one form or another, for more than 2,500 years. A civilization that produced Hafez and Rumi, that built the Persian Empire at a time when most of Europe was still tribal, that gave the world chess, algebra, and some of the finest woven rugs ever made. This documentary is not about the government of Iran. It's about Iran. The land, the culture, the 85 million people navigating a life that is more complicated, more contradictory, and more human than any single headline can contain. The world that existed before. To understand modern Iran, you need to understand what it was and what it believes itself to still be. Persia was one of the defining civilizations of the ancient world. At the height of the Achaemenid Empire in the 5th century BC, the Persian domain stretched from the Aegean Sea to the Indus Valley. A multicultural, multilingual empire that is notable in historical record for a relatively sophisticated approach to the administration of conquered peoples. Cyrus the Great, the empire's founder, issued a declaration of freedom for conquered Babylonian peoples that is sometimes described as the world's first human rights charter, though historians debate the precise framing of that claim. This deep historical self-awareness runs through Iranian national identity like a current beneath everything else. Iranians are not Arabs. They are Persian, with a distinct language, a distinct cultural lineage, and a distinct sense of civilizational continuity that makes the tumult of the last 45 years feel, to many Iranians, like a temporary disruption in a very long story. Revolution and what came after. In 1979, the Shah was overthrown. Mohammad Reza Pahlavi had ruled Iran for decades under an increasingly authoritarian government, backed by the United States, modernizing the country economically and secularly while simultaneously running one of the region's most feared intelligence and security services, SAVAK. The opposition that ultimately brought him down was not a single movement. It was a coalition of leftists, Democrats, religious conservatives, and nationalists who agreed on little except that the Shah had to go. What emerged from that coalition was the Islamic Republic, led by Ayatollah Khomeini, a form of government built on the concept of velayat-e-faqih, the guardianship of the Islamic jurist, which placed ultimate political authority in the hands of a supreme religious leader rather than any elected body. The liberals and leftists who had marched alongside the clerics found themselves largely marginalized within years, some imprisoned, some executed, many forced into exile. And then, before the new government had even fully consolidated its power, a war began. The war that never fully ended in people's minds. In September 1980, Iraqi forces under Saddam Hussein crossed the border into Iran. What followed was one of the most devastating armed conflicts of the second half of the 20th century, 8 years of trench warfare that drew unavoidable comparisons to World War I. Chemical weapons were used against Iranian soldiers and civilian populations in numbers that killed tens of thousands, and left a generation of survivors living with permanent respiratory damage, cancers, and neurological conditions that are still being treated in Iranian hospitals today. Somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million Iranians died, depending on the source. A generation of young men was consumed by it. The cities of Abadan, Dezful, Khorramshahr, and others were bombed, shelled, and fought over in close-quarters urban combat that left entire districts in rubble. The international community, it must be said, largely backed Iraq during the conflict, or looked away. Western governments, including the United States, provided intelligence and military support to Saddam Hussein's forces. The use of chemical weapons against Iran was documented and for the most part was not met with the kind of international condemnation that such weapons produce today. For Iranians who lived through it, the war is not a historical event. It is a defining wound. The generation that fought it is now in their 50s and 60s, and they carry it in their bodies and their memories. Murals of martyrs still cover the walls of cities across the country. Families still visit the graves of sons lost in the southwestern marshes. The emotional and psychological aftermath of that conflict shaped Iran's collective character in ways that outsiders rarely acknowledge when they discuss Iranian politics or Iranian behavior in the regional sphere. It also shaped a generation's relationship to the state. Men who volunteered or were drafted to fight a war that lasted nearly a decade, who watched friends die in mass human wave tactics, who came home to a country still trying to understand what it had become, carry a complicated loyalty. Some remain deeply devoted to the revolutionary ideals they fought for. Others feel abandoned, economically left behind in a country that commemorates their sacrifice while struggling to provide them with basic economic stability in old age. Veterans of the Iran-Iraq War suffer from chemical weapon exposure at rates that the Iranian healthcare system has struggled to adequately treat, partly due to sanctions-related restrictions on medical imports and pharmaceutical access. The long-term survivors of mustard gas exposure, exposed in their youth during trench warfare in the 1980s, are now elderly patients with chronic lung disease and elevated cancer rates who represent one of the most direct, most human costs of a conflict the outside world has largely moved on from discussing. Reconstruction and the sanctions wall. When the ceasefire finally came in 1988, Iran faced the task of rebuilding a country that had been at war for nearly a decade. The reconstruction was real and in many respects impressive. Cities were rebuilt, infrastructure was restored. The population, which had been suppressed during the war years, began to grow explosively. By the 2000s, Iran had one of the most highly educated young populations in the region, with higher literacy rates than many neighboring states and a significant and expanding university system that produced large numbers of engineers, physicians, and scientists. But reconstruction happened under a condition that defined and constrained nearly everything: sanctions. International economic sanctions, applied first by the United States and later by the European Union and the United Nations in various configurations, were designed to pressure Iran over its nuclear program and its regional conduct. In practical terms, what they did was disconnect Iran from the international financial system, restrict its oil exports, block access to foreign technology in sectors ranging from aviation to medicine, and steadily erode the value of the national currency. The Iranian rial, once a reasonably stable currency, has collapsed in value so dramatically over the past 4 decades that Iranians now routinely speak in tomans, an informal unit equivalent to 10 rials, and price major transactions in US dollars held through informal channels. Inflation has run in double and triple digits in recent years. In 2023, annual inflation was running above 40%. The purchasing power of ordinary Iranians has been squeezed relentlessly. Medicines have been affected. Aircraft parts have been affected. The Iranian aviation sector, cut off from Boeing and Airbus spare parts, has operated aging fleets, a situation that has contributed to crash records that are significantly worse than international norms and that have killed hundreds of Iranian civilians in domestic aviation accidents over the years. The sanctions, their architects will argue, were about accountability and non-proliferation. For the family that can't afford imported medication or the child who lost a parent in a preventable plane crash, the abstraction doesn't provide much comfort. Daily life beneath the headlines. Drive into Tehran on any ordinary morning and you will encounter a city of 15 million people that operates with a chaotic, exhausting, deeply human energy that has almost nothing to do with geopolitics. The traffic is extraordinary. Gridlock is a permanent condition, and the air quality in Tehran is among the worst of any major world city, the product of geography, population, older vehicles, and fuel subsidy policies that have kept petrol cheap and traffic volumes high. The Alborz Mountains rise dramatically behind the northern part of the city on clear days, snow-capped for much of the year, visible above the smog on the mornings when the wind cooperates. Food is central to Iranian social life in a way that is difficult to overstate. Persian cuisine is built around fresh herbs, saffron, dried fruit, pomegranate, and slow-cooked stews, gourmet sabzi, fesanjan, ashe-reshte, that require patience and care. Hospitality, the concept of ta'aruf, is embedded so deeply in Iranian social interaction that there is an entire cultural practice built around the ritual of refusing and insisting before acceptance, a choreography of social grace that can confuse outsiders and charms them once understood. Beneath the surface of official religious conservatism runs a cultural life that refuses to stop. Iranian cinema is internationally acclaimed. Directors like Asghar Farhadi have won Academy Awards twice, producing films of a psychological and social sophistication that draw comparison to the best of European art house cinema. To Persian literature and poetry and music maintain deep roots in everyday life. The poetry of Hafez is not a school subject to most Iranians. It is something people actually quote, reference, and use as a kind of shared emotional vocabulary. Music operates in a particularly interesting space. Official restrictions on Western music and on mixed-gender public concerts have produced an underground music scene of significant vitality. Tehran has a thriving private party culture, house concerts, and a streaming ecosystem that routes around official restrictions. Young Iranians are among the heaviest VPN users in the world, a practical daily navigation of an internet that is officially filtered and practically porous. Women, protest, and the fault line. The question of women in Iran cannot be answered simply because it isn't a simple situation. Legally and officially, Iranian women face a set of restrictions that are real and significant. The mandatory hijab, compulsory public head covering, has been enforced with varying severity across different political administrations. Women face legal disadvantages in marriage, divorce, inheritance, and testimony. Public space is structured by rules that apply to women differently than to men. And yet Iranian women are not absent from public life. They are among the most educated female populations in the region, with female university enrollment in Iran consistently running above 50% of total university students, a figure higher than in many countries that face no comparable criticism. Iranian women work as doctors, lawyers, engineers, academics, journalists, and filmmakers. They drive, they travel, they manage businesses. The texture of daily life for Iranian women is more complex than either the official government presentation or the simplified Western headline tends to capture. The contradiction between these two realities, the legal restrictions and the living reality of educated, active, politically engaged Iranian women, came into open conflict in September 2022 when a 22-year-old Kurdish Iranian woman named Mahsa Amini was detained by Iran's morality police in Tehran, reportedly for improper hijab, and died in custody 3 days later. What followed was the largest sustained protest movement Iran had seen in decades. Under the slogan, "Woman, Life, Freedom," protests erupted across the country, in cities large and small, among demographics that went well beyond the urban youth the government might have dismissed as Western-influenced. Young women burned their headscarves in the streets. Security forces killed protesters. Estimates of the death toll range from 300 to over 500. Thousands were arrested. And yet the protests continued for months, leaving behind a changed national consciousness, a generation of Iranians who had stood in the street and said clearly that the social contract they were being offered was not acceptable. The government ultimately did not fall, but neither did the sentiment. Brain drain and the generation leaving. Iran produces more than 400,000 university graduates per year from a university system that is, in certain fields, genuinely excellent. It has produced Nobel Prize winners, Fields medalists, and an internationally recognized scientific research community that operates against the headwinds of sanctions-imposed technology restrictions and import limitations. And it is losing a significant portion of that talent. The brain drain from Iran is one of the defining demographic challenges facing the country. In numbers that consistently place Iran among the highest sources of educated immigrant populations globally relative to its educated class. The International Monetary Fund has, at various points, described Iran's rate of skilled emigration as among the highest in the world. The reasons are layered. Economic conditions driven largely by sanctions, restrictions on professional and personal freedoms, limited political voice, and, particularly among women, the calculation that the costs of staying are higher than the costs of rebuilding a life somewhere else. Those who leave carry Iran with them. The Iranian diaspora is among the most educated and economically successful immigrant communities in several Western countries, with particularly strong concentrations in the United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom. The ancient Spring Festival, that has been observed for over 3,000 years, marked the calendar of the diaspora with a consistency that speaks to how deeply the culture runs. Nowruz, the country that survives. On the first day of spring each year, something happens in Iran that has been happening without interruption for more than 3 millennia. The Persian New Year arrives with the exact astronomical moment of the spring equinox, and it is greeted in Iranian homes with a table called the Haft Scene, set with 7 symbolic items whose names begin with the letter S in Farsi. Sprouted wheat representing new life, sumac representing the color of sunrise, garlic representing medicine, an apple representing health, vinegar representing age and patience, coins representing prosperity, and samanu, a sweet pudding representing affluence. A mirror, goldfish in a bowl, the poetry of Hafez, painted eggs. It is the same table in its essential elements that Iranian families set 3,000 years ago. It survived Alexander the Great, it survived the Arab conquest and the adoption of Islam, it survived the Mongol invasion, it survived the 1979 revolution, which initially tried to suppress it as a pre-Islamic tradition before the scale of popular attachment made that position untenable. It survived 8 years of war and 40 years of sanctions. That continuity is what this documentary is ultimately about. Not the geopolitics, not the nuclear negotiations, not the supreme leader and the Revolutionary Guard and the complex architecture of a political system. The rest of the world spends enormous energy debating. It's about a country that has been here in one form or another for longer than almost any other political entity on Earth, that has absorbed invasion, revolution, war, and isolation, and kept setting the half-seen table. That has young people sitting in Tehran apartments watching illegal streaming content on VPNs, listening to underground music, falling in love, studying for medical school, arguing about poetry and politics in the same breath. That has 85 million people with families and fears and ambitions and a culture so deep it can absorb almost anything and keep going. Iran is not a headline. It never was. Like and subscribe for more documentary content that goes beneath the surface of the world's most misunderstood places. Thanks for watching.